May 2nd, 1943. The polished wood of the operations room table at BDU headquarters in Paris reflected the stark red markings on the latest situation maps. They showed more than tactical positions. They showed collapse. Admiral Karl Dönitz, who had once envisioned the Atlantic as Germany's decisive battlefield, now held loss reports that described something far more unsettling than defeat. They described transformation of the ocean, of warfare, and of the very nature of submarining. 7 U-boats confirmed lost in the first 48 hours of May, 12 more overdue, presumed destroyed. Many of these submarines were commanded by officers Dönitz had personally mentored, skilled hunters who had once terrorized the convoys, now destroyed in rapid succession. The reports did not speak of isolated mechanical failures or unfortunate ambushes. They spoke of relentless detection, coordinated air-sea attacks, and escorts that no longer pursued blindly, but hunted methodically. Across the dimly lit room, his operations officer placed another message onto the table. It was a request, unprecedented in tone, from one of the Kriegsmarine's most reliable U-boat aces. Korvettenkapitän Klaus Scholz of U-108. Scholz had survived more than 2 years in the Atlantic, commanding with exceptional skill, composure, and intuition. He was not merely experienced, he embodied the spirit of the U-boat force. And yet, his message did not report an attack or mechanical failure. It reported exhaustion, not of his hull or engines, but of the very viability of submarine warfare. His boat had been depth-charged for 14 hours. 14 hours of unbroken pursuit by escorts that never seemed to lose contact, escorts that appeared to possess some unnatural capability to track a submerged vessel, regardless of speed, maneuver, or depth. Sonar, radar, HF, DF, airborne detection. Whatever it was, it worked. Every known evasive tactic had failed. The crew was nearing psychological collapse. The batteries were depleted. The boat was damaged. But, worst of all, the methods that had always worked before now failed completely. There was nothing left to try, and nothing left to hope for. Dönitz had always believed that his strategy would challenge the Allies in ways they could not easily counter. Submarines operating in secrecy, striking with surprise, then vanishing into the depths. This was asymmetric warfare before the term existed, but in that operations room in May 1943, he understood that the enemy had done something far more profound than merely improve anti-submarine tactics. They had reshaped the battlefield into a place where stealth no longer existed. U-boats had not only lost the advantage, they had lost the ocean. The loss reports contained disturbing patterns. Boats were being detected before making any transmissions. Convoys seemed to change course before U-boats arrived in intercept positions. Escorts appeared in places they should not logically have been. Aircraft attacked with eerie accuracy, as though informed of submarine positions in advance. Some boats had been attacked at night on the surface despite using radar detectors, implying that the Allies had either improved radar or found a way to detect submarines even without emissions. The Allies had broken the U-boat's invisibility. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical losses. German submariners had once believed themselves to be the hunters. Now they felt hunted by enemies who did not guess, did not search, but appeared to know. In Berlin, some still believed these losses were temporary, an unfortunate spike, a phase, an unlucky convergence of events. But Dönitz knew the truth. These were not accidents. The Allies were not lucky. They were certain. They had achieved something Germany could not compete with, a complete integration of intelligence, production, technology, and operational coordination. An alliance of industry and information that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. He reread Scholz's request to abort, not from cowardice, but from certainty. The captain wrote with characteristic frankness, "Patrol no longer tactically viable, survival probability approaches 0, request permission to withdraw before total loss of crew and vessel." That sentence cut deeper than any statistics. This was not a man asking to be spared. This was a warrior telling his commander, We cannot fight this war anymore, not because we are incapable, but because the war itself has changed. Dönitz understood. The U-boat war had never been emotional. It had always been mathematical. For every submarine built, Germany needed 10,000 tons of steel, trained crews, and months of preparation. For every damaged boat, weeks of shipyard labor. But for the Allies, destroyers could be built faster than U-boats could sink them. Escort carriers rolled off American assembly lines at speeds unimaginable to German builders. Each month, the United States produced more aircraft than Germany could deploy in a year. The Allies had turned warfare into an equation. One Germany could not solve. In 1942, each U-boat still held the power to disrupt the war's outcome. In 1943, each loss was merely a number, and each number represented something irreversible. The reports continued. U-531 sunk with all hands. U-112 destroyed by convoy escorts, no survivors. U-630 depth charge near Iceland, presumed lost. U-710 attacked by aircraft before reaching patrol zone. And on it went. Losses no longer occurred sporadically. They cascaded. By the end of May, Germany had lost 41 submarines, nearly a quarter of its operational U-boat force. But the meaning of that number went beyond the immediate loss. It represented something much worse, the collapse of the strategic value of submarines. Even if Germany built more, even if it trained more crews, the battlefield had turned against them in principle, not only in practice. Submarining, as Germany had known it, had become obsolete. In that operations room, a decision took shape, quietly but definitively. Not a surrender, not yet, but an acceptance of a greater truth, that courage could no longer overcome calculation, and mastery of the periscope and hydrophone could no longer defeat mastery of radar, sonar, code breaking, and aircraft production. Dönitz walked to the map. He placed his hand on the Atlantic. The battlefield he had once believed would bring Germany victory, or at least parity. Now, it represented certainty. He turned to his staff. Begin withdrawal of boats from the North Atlantic. Immediately. The war at sea did not end that day, but it changed that day, irrevocably. From that moment forward, Germany would not fight for control of the Atlantic. It would fight simply to delay the inevitable. Dönitz understood what these reports meant. The arithmetic of submarine warfare, which had governed his strategic calculations since 1939, had reversed with catastrophic speed. For 3 years, U-boats had sunk Allied tonnage faster than shipyards could replace it. Now, in the span of weeks, his submarines were being destroyed faster than German yards could build them. What none of his staff officers knew was that May 1943 would mark not just a tactical setback, but the effective end of the U-boat offensive that had nearly severed Britain's maritime lifeline. The decision Dönitz would make before month's end would acknowledge a truth that shocked every German naval officer. They had lost the Battle of the Atlantic. The transformation had begun with brutal clarity in early May. Convoy ONS-5, struggling through North Atlantic gales, had become the focal point for 3 wolf packs, totaling 41 U-boats. By traditional calculations, this concentration should have resulted in devastating losses for the convoy. Instead, the submarines themselves were slaughtered. 6 U-boats destroyed in 3 days. U-125, U-638, U-531, U-438, U-264, and U-707, all sent to the bottom by escorts employing weapons and tactics that seemed impossible to counter. Survivors pulled from the frigid water described attacks that began before submarines could even detect the approaching vessels, depth charges that detonated with uncanny accuracy, aircraft that appeared without warning in darkness and fog. Oberleutnant zur See Ulrich Volkers, commanding U-125, had been one of the Kriegsmarine's most experienced officers. 17 war patrols, 22 ships sunk. His tactical skill had kept his crew alive through encounters that destroyed lesser boats. On May 6, 1943, all that experience meant nothing against HMS Oribe's Hedgehog barrage. U-125 went down with all 54 hands, including Fokkers. The shock of losing such veteran commanders rippled through the U-boat force with demoralizing speed. These were not inexperienced officers making tactical errors. These were the cream of the submarine service, men who understood the Atlantic's rhythms and had developed sophisticated evasion techniques. If they could be destroyed so easily, what chance did younger commanders have? Dönitz examined the intelligence reports, attempting to explain the catastrophic reversal. His staff spoke of improved radar the German detection equipment couldn't sense, acoustic homing torpedoes that required no visual aiming, direction-finding networks that could triangulate a U-boat's position from a single brief radio transmission, aircraft equipped with powerful searchlights that turned night into day. But the Admiral understood something his junior officers did not yet grasp. The Allies had not achieved victory through any single technological breakthrough. They had created an integrated system of anti-submarine warfare that exploited every German vulnerability simultaneously. It was not a matter of better weapons, but of better methodology. The true scope of Allied capabilities remained hidden behind Ultra's curtain of secrecy. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park were reading German naval communications with near-perfect accuracy. Every operational order Dönitz transmitted to his boats at sea was being decrypted within hours. Wolfpack assembly coordinates, patrol areas, refueling rendezvous points, all were compromised before operations began. American industrial capacity amplified Allied technological advantages to devastating effect. In May 1943 alone, American shipyards launched 140 escort vessels. Destroyer escorts, frigates, corvettes, and patrol craft flooded into the Atlantic at a rate no German strategist had imagined possible. Each new escort meant another submarine hunter. Each additional aircraft meant less sanctuary for surfaced U-boats charging batteries. The mathematics that had once favored Germany now worked inexorably against her. At peak efficiency, German yards could commission 25 new U-boats monthly. But in May 1943, Allied forces destroyed 43 submarines. Even if production doubled, which was impossible given strategic bombing and resource shortages, losses exceeded replacements by catastrophic margins. Kapitän-Leutnant Herbert Werner, commanding U-230, experienced the new reality and first-hand during his May patrol. After detecting a convoy south of Greenland, he attempted a classic night surface attack. Before reaching firing position, his boat was illuminated by searchlights from an aircraft he hadn't detected approaching. The Avenger's depth charges forced an emergency dive that damaged diving planes and ruptured fuel tanks. For the next 6 days, Werner played a desperate game of survival against escorts that maintained contact with impossible tenacity. Every time U-230 surfaced to ventilate the boat and charge batteries, radar-equipped aircraft arrived within minutes. Sonobuoys dropped. In patterns tracked the submarine's submerged movements. Coordinated attacks by multiple escorts left no opportunity for escape. Werner survived only because a sudden storm front reduced visibility enough to break contact. He returned to port with batteries critically depleted, diesel fuel contaminated with seawater, and a crew suffering from carbon dioxide poisoning after remaining submerged for 18 consecutive hours. His patrol report captured the transformation. "We are no longer hunters. We have become targets in a shooting gallery where the enemy holds every advantage." The human cost of May 1943 extended beyond statistics. Each lost submarine represented an average crew of 48 men. Most went down with their boats trapped inside steel coffins as Atlantic pressure crushed hull compartments. The few survivors pulled from oil slicks often died from hypothermia before rescue. German submariners faced death with a certainty that approached mathematical precision. Dönitz visited the submarine pens at Lorient on May 15, 1943. He observed the crews preparing for patrol and saw something that troubled him more than tactical reports. The young officers boarding their boats possessed a fatalism absent in earlier war years. They understood they were unlikely to return. Some penned farewell letters before sailing. Others made requests for personal effects to be forwarded to families. The Admiral spoke with Oberleutnant zur See Heinz Hasenschar, commanding U-628 on her first war patrol. At 23 years of age, Hasenschar represented the new generation of U-boat commanders. Abbreviated training, minimal sea experience. He commanded a crew averaging 20 years old, none of whom had been to sea before. Dönitz asked the standard questions about readiness and morale. Hasenschar responded with appropriate confidence, but his eyes betrayed the truth. This young officer knew he was sailing toward near certain death. The Admiral could offer no reassurance that would alter those odds. U-628 sailed from Lorient on May 17, 1943. She was sunk with all hands by HMS Wanderer on July 3, 1943. Hasenschar never reached his operational area. The collapse of German submarine effectiveness in May 1943 stemmed from multiple simultaneous developments that converged with devastating synergy. Each would have been difficult to counter individually. Together, they created conditions where U-boat operations became suicidal. Centimetric radar represented the most significant tactical breakthrough. Previous Allied radar operated on wavelengths German detection equipment could sense, providing warning of approaching aircraft or surface vessels. The new 10-centimeter radar was invisible to German receivers. U-boats, operating on the surface, confident they would detect approaching threats, were being surprised by aircraft and escorts they never knew existed until weapons were falling. Kapitän Leutnant Hans-Jürgen Auffermann commanded U-514 through 3 successful war patrols. His tactical doctrine emphasized constant vigilance and immediate crash dives at the first indication of approaching aircraft. On May 8, 1943, south of Greenland, his lookouts maintained Pacific watch under clear skies. They never saw the Liberator bomber that caught U-514 on the surface at dawn. The aircraft's Mark 24 mine, an acoustic homing torpedo, disguised under the innocuous designation to hide its true nature, tracked U-514 through her crash dive. The explosion broke the submarine's back at 60 meters depth. Auffermann and his entire crew of 54 men died without understanding what weapon had killed them. Hedgehog mortars transformed surface escort effectiveness through simple mechanical innovation. Previous depth charges required escorts to pass over a submarine's estimated position before dropping weapons, forcing them to lose sonar contact during the crucial attack phase. Hedgehogs projected 24 contact-fused bombs ahead of the attacking vessel, allowing continuous sonar tracking throughout the engagement. Each projectile contained 35 pounds of Torpex explosive. Contact with a submarine's hull triggered detonation powerful enough to rupture pressure hulls. A single hit was usually fatal. The weapon's forward-throwing design meant escorts could maintain continuous attack pressure, exhausting submarine batteries through relentless pursuit. HMS Lagan demonstrated hedgehog effectiveness on May 12, 1943, when she detected U-456 transiting the Bay of Biscay submerged. The Type Vieille submarine, commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Max Martin Teichert, employed every evasion technique developed through 4 years of anti-submarine warfare: emergency depth changes, silent running, decoy bubble generators. None of it mattered against Lagan's persistent sonar contact and hedgehog barrages. The 4th salvo registered 2 hits on U-456's forward section. The submarine's bow collapsed instantly, flooding the forward torpedo room and crew quarters. She sank in less than 90 seconds. Only 3 survivors reached the surface. Teichert was not among them. High-frequency direction finding, called Huff-Duff by Allied operators, exploited German operational doctrine's greatest weakness. U-boat command required frequent radio communications to coordinate Wolfpack operations, position reports every 24 hours, contact reports immediately upon sighting convoys, weather observations twice daily. Each transmission, even lasting only seconds, allowed Allied direction-finding stations to triangulate the submarine's location. Fregattenkapitän Werner Henke commanded U-515 with exceptional skill through 5 war patrols, sinking 24 ships, totaling over 125,000 tons. His tactical brilliance had earned him the Knight's Cross. In May 1943, he transmitted a position report lasting 7 seconds. That was sufficient for direction-finding stations in Newfoundland, Greenland, and Iceland to fix his location within a 5 nautical mile radius. Aircraft were vectored to the area within 2 hours. Henke survived the initial attack through superior ship handling, but was forced to remain submerged for 36 hours while multiple aircraft maintained contact using sonobuoys. When U-515 finally surfaced, batteries exhausted and air quality approaching fatal levels, escorts were waiting in position. Only Henke's exceptional luck allowed him to escape into a fog bank that provided temporary sanctuary. The psychological impact of these new weapons and tactics affected German morale as much as their physical effectiveness. U-boat crews understood they were facing an enemy who could detect them at any time, in any weather, under any conditions. The ocean, which had once provided concealment and sanctuary, had become transparent. There was nowhere to hide. Oberleutnant Zerzi Paul Friedrich Otto, commanding U-270, kept an unofficial diary during his May 1943 patrol. Recovered after the war, it provided unfiltered insight into the mental state of U-boat crews facing the new reality. May 4th. Detected convoy but forced to crash dive by aircraft we never saw approaching. Depth charges damaged diving planes, 4 hours of repairs while escorts circled above us. The men are frightened. So am I. May 7th. 3rd day submerged. Air quality terrible. Several men showing symptoms of carbon dioxide poisoning must surface soon regardless of risk. Operations officer says, at this rate we won't survive the patrol. May 11th. Surfaced at midnight to charge batteries, radar detector silent, confident we were unobserved. After 20 minutes, aircraft illuminated us with searchlights so bright it seemed like daylight. Emergency dive saved us, but batteries still critically low. How did they find us without warning? May 14th. Morale collapsing. Engineer reports we have fuel for maybe 10 more days if we're careful. Haven't fired a torpedo yet. Haven't even reached attack position on a single convoy. We're not fighting anymore. We're just trying to survive long enough to go home. U-270 survived her May patrol and returned to La Pallice on June 2nd, 1943. She sailed again on July 24th and was sunk with all hands by HMS Balsam on August 13th, 1943. Otto's fears had been prophetic. By mid-May, Dönitz could no longer ignore the catastrophic trend lines. Intelligence officers reported that Allied convoy losses had dropped to levels not seen since 1939. April 1943 had seen 56 Allied ships sunk, totaling 344,000 tons. Preliminary May figures suggested losses would barely exceed 150,000 tons, despite having more U-boats at sea than any previous month. The exchange ratio that governs submarine warfare's fundamental arithmetic had reversed completely. In early 1943, each U-boat lost had accounted for approximately 4 Allied ships sunk. By May, the ratio had inverted. For every Allied ship sunk, nearly 2 U-boats were being destroyed. This was unsustainable. This was catastrophic. This was defeat. American industrial capacity amplified the crisis beyond any possibility of German response. Those 140 escort vessels, launched in May, represented the beginning of a production surge that would flood the Atlantic with submarine hunters. Kaiser shipyards on the American West Coast were launching Liberty ships at 3-day intervals. Each cargo vessel replaced the tonnage of 2 typical merchant ships. Even if U-boats achieved 1942 sinking rates, which was impossible under current conditions, they could not sink ships faster than American yards built them. Dönitz confronted Hitler with these realities at the Berghof on May 14, 1943. The Führer, increasingly detached from military reality, initially refused to accept that the U-boat offensive had failed. He spoke of new technologies under development, snorkel, breathing tubes that would allow submarines to run diesel engines while submerged, Type 21 U-boats with revolutionary battery capacity, enabling sustained high-speed submerged operations. The Admiral explained patiently that such innovations would arrive too late. Current U-boats could not operate effectively under present conditions. Losses were exceeding replacements by margins that would eliminate the operational force within months. Continuing the current strategy meant sending young men to certain death for no strategic gain. Hitler ultimately accepted Dönitz's recommendation with reluctance. The U-boat offensive against North Atlantic convoys would be suspended pending deployment of improved boats and weapons. It was not presented as surrender, but as tactical redeployment. The submarines would focus on less heavily defended areas: the Mediterranean, the South Atlantic, the Indian Ocean. Everyone in that room understood the truth. Germany had lost the Battle of the Atlantic. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz transmitted the withdrawal order to all U-boats operating in the North Atlantic. Owing to the present superiority of enemy anti-submarine forces in the North Atlantic, all boats are to move outside the Bay of Biscay and proceed to less threatened operational areas. The message continued, with language attempting to frame retreat as tactical adjustment. But submarine commanders, reading those decoded words, understood their real meaning. The Atlantic, which German U-boats had dominated for 3 years, had been lost. The boats that had nearly starved Britain into submission were being driven from the ocean. Captain Lieutenant Adalbert Schnee, commanding U-201, received the withdrawal order while stalking a convoy west of Ireland. His tactical position was perfect. Wind and sea conditions favored night surface attacks. The convoy's escort seemed light. Under previous circumstances, this would have been an ideal opportunity for multiple torpedo salvos. Instead, Schnee secured his attack and turned south toward safer waters. His war diary entry captured the bitterness felt throughout the U-boat force. "We are abandoning the battlefield, not because we lack courage or skill, but because the enemy possesses advantages we cannot overcome. Technology has defeated tactics. Industrial capacity has defeated determination. We are leaving as a beaten force." The withdrawal occurred gradually over 2 weeks, as scattered U-boats disengaged from their patrol areas and transited toward less defended zones. Allied intelligence, reading Dönitz's orders through ultra-decrypts, understood immediately that they had achieved strategic victory. The U-boat threat, which had dominated British strategic calculations since September 1939, had been eliminated as an existential danger. Winston Churchill, who had written that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war, received confirmation of the German withdrawal on May 26, 1943. His relief was palpable, but tempered by awareness of how close the Battle of the Atlantic had come to Allied defeat. Had the withdrawal come 6 months earlier, before centimetric radar deployment, before massive escort production, before fully penetrated German naval codes, the outcome might have been different. Had it come 6 months later, after German technological responses matured, the cost in ships and lives would have been far higher. The timing of May 1943 represented a convergence of Allied capabilities meeting German vulnerabilities at precisely the moment when U-boat effectiveness collapsed below sustainable levels. It was strategic culmination, where continued operations produced diminishing returns that no longer justified the resource expenditure and human cost. The human cost of May 1943 was measured in more than strategic calculations. 38 U-boats were confirmed destroyed during the month. Approximately 1,800 German submariners died. Most were under 25 years old. Many had been at sea for the first time. They died because industrial capacity and technological innovation had transformed the Atlantic into an environment where their submarines could no longer operate. Oberleutnant zur See Hans Hunger commanded U-86 through the first weeks of May on her inaugural war patrol. His boat had commissioned in December 1942, spending 5 months in training before sailing operational. The crew was young, but well-trained. Hunger himself had commanded 2 previous boats and understood Atlantic conditions thoroughly. On May 12, 1943, aircraft from USS Bogue's hunter-killer group detected U-86 charging batteries on the surface 600 miles west of the Azores. The submarine crash-dived successfully, but Mark 24 acoustic torpedoes tracked her through the dive sequence. Twin explosions broke U-186's back amidships. She sank in under 1 minute. All 53 crew members died without reaching the surface. Hunger's last radio transmission, sent moments before the attack, was a routine position report. It would take Allied direction-finding stations approximately 90 seconds to triangulate his location. The aircraft that killed him had been vectored to the area based on that triangulation. His own required communication had sealed his fate. The destruction of supply submarines during May proved particularly devastating to German operational calculations. Type Fort Taunt milch cow submarines carried no torpedoes, serving solely to refuel and resupply combat boats at sea. Each supply submarine enabled multiple combat U-boats to extend their patrols by weeks, dramatically increasing their effectiveness. U-463, commanded by Kapitän Leutnant Leo Wolfbauer, was conducting refueling operations southwest of the Azores when Allied aircraft detected her on May 16, 1943. She was caught with fuel hoses connected to U-462, making crash dive impossible. The explosions from over 400 tons of diesel fuel created a fireball visible from 40 miles away. Both submarines were destroyed. 103 men died. The loss of supply boats forced dramatic reductions in U-boat operational range. Type VIC submarines, the backbone of the German submarine force, could no longer reach the American coast. Their patrol areas contracted to the mid-Atlantic, precisely where Allied escort carrier groups operated with greatest density. The strategic geography that had once favored U-boats with vast ocean spaces to hide in had shrunk to hunting grounds controlled by the enemy. German attempts to respond to Allied technological advantages achieved marginal success at best. The Naxos radar detector could sense some Allied radar frequencies, but not the critical 10-centimeter wavelength. Improved anti-aircraft armament allowed surfaced U-boats to fight back against attacking aircraft, but usually resulted in the submarine's destruction rather than successful defense. The tragic case of U-421 illustrated the futility of surface combat against aircraft. Dönitz authorized an experiment in May 1943, equipping several boats with heavy anti-aircraft batteries to fight their way through the Bay of Biscay rather than transiting submerged. U-441 received quadruple 20mm cannons, twin 37mm guns, and armored protection for gun crews. On May 24, 1943, she encountered a British Sunderland flying boat. The submarine's crew engaged confidently, believing their superior firepower would prevail. The aircraft sustained damage but remained airborne long enough to summon reinforcements. Within 30 minutes, 3 more aircraft arrived. Under concentrated attack from 4 directions simultaneously, U-441's gun crews were decimated and the submarine severely damaged. She survived only because escorts arrived too late to prevent her escape. The experiment was discontinued after several submarines were lost attempting similar tactics. U-boats were designed for stealth and concealment, not surface combat. Trying to fight openly invited destruction by forces specifically configured for anti-submarine warfare. By month's end, as surviving U-boats limped toward distant operational areas or returned to French bases, the scope of Germany's defeat became undeniable. Allied convoys were crossing the Atlantic, virtually unmolested. shipping losses had dropped to levels comparable with peacetime marine accidents. The stranglehold on Britain's maritime lifeline had been broken decisively. Post-war analysis would reveal that May 1943 represented the single most decisive month in the entire Battle of the Atlantic. More than any dramatic engagement or technological breakthrough, the cumulative effect of 43 U-boats destroyed in 31 days demonstrated that Germany had lost not just a campaign, but a fundamental capability. The shock experienced by German submariners during May 1943 stemmed from the speed and totality of their defeat. In March, wolf packs had savaged convoys SC-121 and HX-229, sinking 40 ships in coordinated attacks that seemed to confirm U-boat superiority. 2 months later, those same tactics produced catastrophic losses for the submarines themselves. Veterans like Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Schuch, who had survived since 1939 through a combination of skill and luck, found their experience suddenly meaningless. Schuch commanded U-105 through 9 war patrols, developing sophisticated evasion techniques refined through hundreds of encounters with escorts. In May 1943, none of his accumulated knowledge could protect him against aircraft equipped with centimetric radar and acoustic homing torpedoes. U-105 was caught on the surface on June 2, 1943, by aircraft that approached without any radar warning. The submarine crash-dived successfully, but acoustic torpedoes tracked her to depth. The explosions killed Schuch and his entire crew of 48 men. Experience, courage, and tactical brilliance had proven insufficient against systematic technological superiority. The 140 escort vessels launched by American yards in May 1943 represented more than quantitative superiority. Each ship embodied lessons learned through 3 years of anti-submarine warfare, improved sonar with greater range and accuracy, enhanced depth charge racks, enabling faster reload times, better crew accommodations, reducing fatigue during extended hunts, more powerful engines enabling sustained high-speed pursuit. These vessels were not hastily constructed stopgaps, but purpose-designed submarine hunters, incorporating the latest technological innovations. They entered service with crews trained specifically for anti-submarine warfare, using tactics refined through operational research and practical experience. They represented industrial warfare at its most effective, translating raw, productive capacity into overwhelming combat power. German yards, by contrast, struggled to maintain even reduced production quotas. Strategic bombing disrupted supply chains, labor shortages, forced use of slave workers who occasionally sabotaged production. Material quality declined as critical resources were diverted to other priorities. Type VIC submarines, commissioned in May 1943, suffered from defects that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. The qualitative gap accompanied quantitative disadvantage to create a synergistic effect that made German submarine operations untenable. Worse boats, facing better opponents while outnumbered by increasing margins, represented a death spiral no amount of determination could reverse. Admiral Dönitz understood these realities with painful clarity. The decision to withdraw from the North Atlantic was not tactical flexibility, but strategic necessity. His force was being annihilated. Continuing operations under existing conditions meant losing the entire submarine fleet within months while achieving negligible strategic effect. The withdrawal shocked Hitler and the German High Command because it acknowledged publicly what many had suspected privately. Germany could no longer challenge Allied maritime supremacy. The U-boat force, which had been presented as an invincible weapon capable of starving Britain into submission, had been defeated by an enemy who combined technological innovation with industrial capacity at scales Germany could never match. May 1943 marked the effective end of Germany's only potentially war-winning strategy. Without submarine control of the Atlantic, Britain could be supplied indefinitely. Without threatening Allied shipping, Germany could not prevent the massive buildup of forces in Britain, preparing for eventual invasion. The strategic initiative had passed irrevocably to the Allies. The submarines that departed the North Atlantic in May would continue fighting until war's end. Some would achieve tactical successes in less defended waters. Individual commanders would sink additional ships, but they would never again threaten Allied strategic objectives. They had become an expensive harassment force rather than a decisive weapon. The shock of May 1943 reverberated through German strategic planning for the remainder of the war. If U-boats, supported by extensive infrastructure and combat-tested tactics, could be defeated so completely, what chance did other weapon systems have against similar Allied advantages? The Battle of the Atlantic had demonstrated that Germany could not win a prolonged industrial conflict against enemies who possessed overwhelming productive capacity and technological sophistication. Those 140 escort vessels, launched in a single month, represented a fraction of American shipbuilding capacity. The aircraft that hunted U-boats comprised a tiny percentage of Allied air forces. The intelligence networks reading German communications were just one element of comprehensive signals intelligence efforts. Germany faced not just tactical defeat, but systemic disadvantage across every dimension of modern warfare. The young submariners who died in May 1943 became casualties of industrial modernity meeting traditional martial values. They possessed courage, determination, and professional skill, but they fought for a nation that could not match enemy productive capacity or technological innovation. Individual excellence could not overcome systematic inferiority. Their shock at discovering the new Atlantic environment, where previous certainties no longer applied and accumulated experience meant nothing against new weapons and tactics, prefigured the broader German experience as the war continued. What worked in 1941 failed in 1943. What seemed impossible became routine for opponents who approached warfare as a technical problem, requiring systematic solutions. The Battle of the Atlantic did not end with the cinematic drama so often imagined in war stories. There was no final clash, no climactic engagement between wolf packs and convoys, no last stand beneath crashing waves. Instead, its closing act unfolded with a quiet inevitability, defined not by heroic last shots, but by strategic understanding. It ended when Admiral Karl Dönitz, the architect of Germany's U-boat strategy, understood that his submarines no longer hunted, they were being hunted. That realization marked the end of the most prolonged and consequential maritime campaign in modern history. By May 1943, the Atlantic had become something fundamentally different from what it had been in 1940, when U-boats ruled the sea lanes with near impunity. In the early years of the war, a dozen submarines could disrupt entire economic systems, paralyze supply lines, and threaten the fate of nations. But by 1943, that reality had been reversed. The ocean surface, once a vast and vulnerable expanse, transformed into an integrated battlefield. What had begun as a decentralized contest of individual U-boat captains evolved into an industrial, technological, and informational war in which victory no longer belonged to the boldest hunter, but to the side that mastered systems. Across the Atlantic, convoys began to move with a confidence unimaginable a year before. Merchantmen sailed across waters once known as the Black Pit, an expanse where no air cover existed, now shielded by long-range liberators, escort carriers, and radar-equipped corvettes. The transformation was not the result of one invention, one strategy, or one single victory, but rather the relentless accumulation of multiple advantages that, when layered together, became insurmountable. The Allies did not simply build more ships, they built systems. They did not merely improve radar, they integrated it with air patrols, direction-finding stations, sonar buoys, and intelligence centers. The Allies turned the ocean into a monitored grid, a domain where stealth, once the U-boat's greatest advantage, became increasingly irrelevant, where submarines once vanished into the depths like ghosts. By May 1943, they surfaced like prey. It was not a single engagement that broke the U-boat fleet. Rather, it was the month-by-month erosion of their strategic viability. U-boats could still sink ships. In fact, some of their most skilled commanders continued to score kills into 1944. But the meaning of those victories had changed. Tactical success, once strategically significant, was now strategically meaningless. Germany could sink a convoy, but it could not stop the next one, or the one after that. For every ship lost, America built 3 more. For every submarine destroyed, Germany could replace only half. Dönitz's U-boat fleet had become the most tragic of military forces, tactically capable but strategically obsolete. May 1943 changed everything. It was the month that Germany's submarine losses spiked to an unsustainable level. 41 U-boats destroyed, nearly a quarter of their operational fleet. Losses had crossed a threshold where they were no longer painful, but fatal. At the same time, American shipyards launched 140 new escort ships, destroyer escorts, corvettes, and escort carriers, to guard convoys, hunt U-boats, and expand air coverage deeper into the ocean. The numbers told a story that no U-boat captain could ignore. The balance had tipped, and it would never shift back. The submariners themselves felt the change before Berlin fully understood it. They sensed the ocean tightening around them. No longer could they attack with impunity or retreat safely beneath the waves. Their every move seemed anticipated, their transmissions interpreted, their decisions countered. The illusion of invisibility had evaporated. Surface escorts were faster, aircraft ranged farther, and sonar grew sharper. The Allies had stopped reacting to U-boat attacks. They were now predicting them. This was the most profound shift of the war, the transition from reactive defense to proactive dominance. It was not just more ships, more planes, or more weapons. It was about intelligence. Ultra-decrypts, HF-DF tracking, and comprehensive analysis at Bletchley Park and in American intelligence centers turned U-boat hunting from guesswork into science. Convoys began rerouting, sometimes hours ahead, based on decrypted U-boat communications. Wolf packs intended to intercept supplies to Britain instead found empty seas or, worse, hunter-killer groups waiting for them. This fusion of knowledge and firepower created an entirely new form of warfare, the systematic destruction of enemy capability before it could act. The Battle of the Atlantic became the first fully integrated campaign of modern war, where intelligence, production, technology, and logistics worked as one. It was not a duel between ships, but a confrontation between systems. It revealed a new truth that would define warfare for the rest of the century. The side that could process information, allocate resources efficiently, and sustain operations at industrial scale would win, even if individual battles were lost. Admiral Dönitz understood this better than anyone. He had built the U-boat fleet around concepts of stealth, daring, and tactical brilliance, qualities that had defined the submarine warfare since World War I. But in 1943, he confronted a new kind of enemy, one who fought not through isolated engagements, but through calculated, relentless attrition, one who could build ships faster than Germany could sink them, and destroy submarines faster than Germany could build them. To continue fighting meant writing the obituary of his own submarine force. The decision to withdraw U-boats from the North Atlantic was not merely military, it was profoundly psychological. It was an admission that Germany had entered a war it could not possibly win, a war of capacity, not courage. U-boat commanders who once saw themselves as hunters now felt the roles reverse. The ocean, their ally, their shield, had turned against them. They were no longer the wolves of the sea, but prey observed, tracked and eliminated with precision. Those who survived described their shock not just at defeat, but at the nature of their defeat. They had not been outmaneuvered, they had been outscaled. They had not been outplayed. They had been outproduced. They had not been tactically beaten, but strategically outclassed. What May 1943 taught military planners around the world would shape doctrine for generations. Industrial capacity determines sustainable force levels. Nations that cannot replace their losses cannot endure prolonged conflict. America's shipyards, factories, and assembly lines proved that warfare had entered the era of mass production, and that strategic power was now measured in output, not just battlefield prowess. Technological advantage compounds over time. Radar, sonar, code-breaking, and long-range aviation did not merely add capabilities, they multiplied them, creating exponential increases in effectiveness. Intelligence superiority enables efficient resource allocation. Armed with near real-time knowledge, the Allies ensured every convoy movement was a decision, not a gamble. Every ship escorted where it mattered. Every aircraft patrolled where it counted. Systematic approaches defeat individual excellence at scale. The U-boats were staffed by skilled, courageous crews, led by innovative commanders, but courage and brilliance could not overcome coordinated, high-speed production, predictive intelligence, and comprehensive operational planning. In the end, the last act of the Battle of the Atlantic was marked by silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of certainty. Convoys sailed, escorts patrolled, U-boats withdrew. And in that silence, naval warfare changed forever. The Atlantic became not just an ocean, but a lesson, a message to every future strategist. That war, in the modern age, is no longer won by those who fight the hardest, or even the smartest, but by those who fight the longest, with the greatest unity of intelligence, technology, production, and will. That is why May 1943 was not merely a turning point. It was the dawn of a new kind of war,